Hello and welcome to an Outlook discussion on the cover story. We have our editor Chinki. Chinki, I thought you were going to be in a monster devil getup.
No, I actually met Maya Bhushan and he was also very this thing about these
We-
zombies in Goa. Yeah.
I'm asking her this. We are talking about this because our issue this week is on horror films. It's just not on horror films as in a cinematic way, but the way horror films work. Why do we watch them? What are the kind of people? When do we watch them? Are there certain periods when horror films suddenly become more popular, like say during war or post-war? What do so many of the horror films? They represent so many things. Apart from the horror bit, it's about alienation, it's about isolation, it's about outcasts, it's about freaks out of the society who are like kind of always lonely. People have also sort of argued that so many of the zombie films are actually against consumerism. For instance, this sort of incessant need to buy and consume. So these were broadly the thoughts behind the cover story, and she's written a fantastic intro as always, and she's captured this quite well. If you'd like to elaborate a little bit.
Basically, I want to say how this idea came about. We deal with this week to week issue, and the other day Satish was very flustered and he's like, "Oh, this horror of everything." And I'm like, "Oh yeah, we can come up with a horror issue." And he's like, "Are you serious?" I'm like, "Yeah, I'm serious." And we both watch a lot of horror films, and by and by we started talking to people about this, and obviously people who watch horror films have a certain way of looking at horror films, and Satish has written a fantastic column about going to watch horror movies at 8:30 a.m. in the morning. Then I figured that I have a friend who's a ghostbuster in Mexico, and he has written a fantastic column about this whole exorcism thing, and Maya Bhushan about Go Goa Gone. Which Satish basically said that we should do something about this because, and he has done a fantastic job of it, and many more. So basically, the whole idea was to look at films, and horror films are very intelligent films in the sense that they are allegorical. They use a lot of metaphors, and now this new thing of zombies, and zombies are basically not they're man made. They are creation of ours. So this whole thing of the gods have been rendered useless. Police hierarchies have been broken. And I was very intrigued by the fact that the zombies never finish their food, right? If they, let's say, attack you, they'll eat a little bit and move on to the next prey, which actually is mindless consumerism in this, capitalist world. So yeah, so so that was the idea, and then we thought, okay, let's go with it.
Apparently, after a war, for instance, after a little period after a war, how so many horror films and books are written, and as a reaction. In fact, right from the beginning, right from say Frankenstein's monster, etc., could be read as a reaction to the industrialization that was happening at that time. How man was making machines, and whether, and he was kind of playing God in some ways, and whether these machines are going to someday come to sort of devour us, and these tropes. So, and there are these few tropes that are there. This one is this, of course, this monster going berserk. I mean, something that we create, man creates, and it just goes uncontrollable. That allegory can be seen in so many ways. The other one, of course, is the haunted house. The house itself being haunted, and Chinki, of course, claims that she's been to many haunted houses in Goa and elsewhere. Where doorknobs sort of turn on their own, staircases start creaking, and so on.
No, and the other point we wanted to make when we were talking to Satish, and Satish got the Ramsey brothers' sister, who has given us the excerpt from her book. And
Yeah.
Satish, I mean, we all remember Ramsey brothers, Ahat, Z horror show, and all those films where the booth would come when the woman is either taking a shower or is in some intimate moment. And it was kind of strange. Now looking back at it, we now want to know why that happened, and we have explored that also quite a bit.
Them and the other films which followed, like how it used to be really an excuse to. It was more sleaze than scare, frankly. It was it would have these raunchy numbers, and it would have, as you said, invariably there'll be a a shower scene or a swimming pool scene, and It was, I mean, now of course over years it has been called exploitative, very very sort of patriarchal and misogynist. And but then there is that body of work. I mean, there are those films which are there and which were big hits and people watch them. So you can't negate that either. Though it's curious, as I was mentioning elsewhere, that the Hollywood, if I mean, since we were looking at Hollywood quite a bit in cinematic,
Yeah,
in films, in other genres too. Hollywood has a great run of horror films in the 40s and the 50s and the 60s even.
yeah,
Like for instance, and they were doing tremendous stuff there. There was a lot of course, there was this sleazy bit too. It's just curious that how we still were only looking at this very cliche kind of horror and not get too much into the psychological part of it, till in Hindi movies at least. I mean, in other languages perhaps they were trying things, but till say something like a Raat came
yeah. Rath, I
about,
think, changed the
came
horror
along.
landscape, like how
Yeah, that
Romero
was
did.
about, I think in the early 90s by Ram Gopal
Yeah,
Verma. And then
yeah,
a few others came. But of course, that genre has really, really evolved now on both OTT and
yeah,
and in films, like both, I think Jay Arjun Singh, who's contributed, he starts off with this really brilliant film called Bhutakalam,
yeah,
in Malayalam film with Revati and Shane Nigam. It's really, I mean, in the sense that the horror bit is it's creepy. It's like it grows and grows, but it's just not this jump out of your seat kind of horror. I mean, it's essentially
yeah,
it's a film about a fraught relationship between a mother and a son. And it's also about mental illness. It's about loneliness. And though, I mean, this is a very sort of it's inversion of a whole thing. Though it is a haunted house, it's just a regular house in a city. I mean, it's not this gothic,
yeah,
this
yeah,
haunted house that we normally associate with horror.
yeah.
It's just a flat. I mean, it's just an ordinary looking flat. And to get the creeps out of that, it's quite well done. It's a very strong script and well acted. So we have traveled hell of a long way
Kind
in
of,
this.
yeah. I mean, but I think the Western world is taking over in terms of like thinking. So I think the latest movie that I saw was Army of the Dead, and in several other movies that I've seen, zombies also mutate because it's a virus, right? Spills out of laboratory, and it's also because of our aspirations and ambition and uncontrollable narcissism that we create these kinds of things, and then obviously it goes out of control. So then you see that other film, the Army of the Dead. You just the Las Vegas Falls, and they've quarantined it, and it's just not the zombies who they call shambles in that film, but also the alphas, and alphas are organized. So the thing is, and they can talk like in a different kind of a language. But the thing is, if they are organized, and how are you going to like even defeat them? So that the other hope that horror movies gives you is the fact that if you are if you build alliances and if you become friends, then I look out for you and you look out for me, and that's how that whole collective thing can work, and that's the only way to survive. Any zombie film you see, it's not just about zombies, it's also about interpersonal relationship between people and things like that. And we decided to take this cover, which is not really like horror. It's by my friend who actually has Miriam Koshi, from a Goa-based artist, and she has made a cast of her own. Actually, it's her. She built that cast, and it's shot in her studio. It's part of a film, and she basically talks a lot about conservation in Goa, environment, loneliness. Of course, her mother was a doctor, so she grew up looking at mental asylums, that loneliness, gender, all kinds of things. And so I thought that was a good cover to go with, in a sense that is sensible. And that's when we decided to say the ghosts are us, because zombies look like us, and they are us. They're
Right.
created by us, basically. Yeah.
But apart from this, you were also mentioning, the in the last few decades, the Japanese horror. I mean, you were talking about few films. I mean, I am not that much into that genre yet.
The
So
Korean also.
Korean also.
Yeah, yeah. I did. So the thing is, there's this whole Korean cult in India where they watch all these romantic films, and I somehow got into Korean, films. And my own journey of horror started, obviously, as a kid. I used to watch horror, but not really in that sense. But my real thing began when I had this stalker problem, and my brother said that, I wasted 1 year of my life getting very scared of the stalker, And my brother said that, Chinky, if you want to tame your fear, start watching horror films. And that's how it began. And then I can't, like, now I can't stop. And so that gave me thing. And then I started to wonder why I watch so much horror. And actually, when you watch horror, there's this whole thing of your anxiety takes care of that. And after a stressful day, I always watch a kind of horror. And Korean horror, for instance, is very different, right? So Western horror films, I realized that if they show you this booth over whatever it is, zombies is another matter. But then you don't get scared, right? I mean, then you're like, oh, okay. But like this, really like this thing, like drooling, that kind of monster is kind of disgusting. You don't really. And then you have this Korean horror where they use the sound, right? So I just finished a Korean zombie series set in the medieval times about a kingdom, and there's some purple flower. It's called the kingdom,
Okay.
and there's a purple flower where the trajectory of that purple flower is talked about, and there's a king who turns into a monster, and they make him into a monster because there's this whole thing about the throne. So it's about us. It's not really about the zombie that we turn into a monster, but people are keeping you alive for certain. And there's a lot of reference to war. There's a Japanese invasion. They want to raise an army of the dead people, the undead,
Right.
all kinds of things. And all these imagery, if you see, like you see a lot of these zombie films, the malls have been attacked by zombies. That's a very, very intelligent kind of a thing. And you also see a lot of this imagery comes directly from war. Like the war in Ukraine is going on, and you can see a lot of that. There was this thing I read on Twitter about a man taping his windows, and I've seen that kind of scene in Bird Box and A Quiet Place in many other films. So I think horror, that whole stigma of horror where people think that horror is just whatever. I think there's more to it. Japanese horror, you look at the storyline, the plot, the way they have used zombies or other creatures, and the way they have used the human relationship. I think that's very important.
Just a little mention of the one thought that how, like, again coming back to this Bhutakalam that we were discussing, the films which have are so minimalist, without much effects and without much sort of this visual gymnastics or jugglery. It's like right from the beginning, I think, like for instance, one of the most as top rated horror films, it always comes right up in the list of any of the critics, etc., is like, for instance, is the Innocence. This is a film, it's based on Henry James Turn of the Screw. And it's, I mean, it has, most of the film happens in broad daylight, and I mean, if you were to just follow the story, the caretaker, the nurse who has come to take care of the children, and it's got children, it's very, that's why, I mean, it's very sort of, I mean, it's, the imagery is full of white flowers and quiet lakes, and and yet, I mean, at the end of it, you're so creeped out of the the way the story progresses. It's like, so that really is because it's playing in your mind, in our minds, what we think, how this, so yeah. So I think some of these Japanese, Korean films, I think are, like I said, I'm not much into them, but it seems that they are also very minimalist in that way, isn't it?
They are actually very, and there's this, when you mentioned that broad daylight at night, they use a lot of the broad daylight. Because the horror is us, it's everywhere around us. So why we relegate? And there's this whole thing of breaking the stereotyping of the night. Why is night? What is this darkness? The darkness is all around us. I mean, what is happening around in the world? I think that's the way. That's what horror films like these Japanese and Koreans are very advanced in terms of plot lines. Like Train to Busan, for instance, Korean epic zombie film, and now they have come out with another one which takes place in the school. All of us are dead. And that film, actually, obviously, action, zombies, everything is there. The one beautiful thing is that this kid, she's waiting for her father to rescue, and everybody has like left them. And she said, adults, they like wisdom, and kids like hope. And I would like to go with hope. And I think that was a very powerful line. So there are these gems of lines that are there in these films, and they make you think. It's not just about blood and gore, and there's not much of it either in these kinds of films, if you see. So it's quite intelligent, and I think that's the best way that they have tackled our current day politics, patriarchy, misogyny, sexism, everything.
Yeah.
Even in Suspiria, if you
Yeah.
look at those witches, they are punishing men, right? I mean, so a lot of that, I think I mean, this issue is an attempt to kind of start a conversation about these films and why we
Yeah.
watch them and what are these films, and maybe kind of like we are just giving you a trigger. That's it through the issue.
So I know do go and pick up the issue and log on to www.outlookindia.com. It's live just now. So I mean the stories will come up one after the other. There's hell of a lot to read. Very interesting visually as well as the written part. Thank you
Yeah, and
very
please
much.
watch these films. They're quite interesting. Maybe start with
Yeah.
Night of the Living Dead, black protagonist in the time when the American civil rights movement was going on.
You
Survives
should
zombie
give. In
apocalypse,
fact,
gets
that
killed by rednecks.
we didn't do that in the issue, Chinky. You must give your top 10 horror films, your
Oh yeah,
recommendations.
yeah, actually, yeah. But you also should give.
Oh, I'll do that.
Okay, we'll give you a list also now.
Okay. Thank you
Okay,
so much.
thank you.
Thanks.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye. Thanks.